welcome back to part 2 of today's lesson. So if we're talking about functional analysis, there's several different ways we can go about doing that. So first up, and the one we are mainly going to focus on in SE301, is building a functional hierarchy. All right, the main idea here is that we have an overarching function and then nested subfunctions. So if we're talking about building a rocket system, or you can see to the right, our overall function would be to deliver the payload rapidly and accurately. And then our supporting functions, we need to launch the rocket, we need to transport the payload, we need to achieve the desired effects. All right, so that would be, in short, how we would build a functional hierarchy. A functional flow diagram we do not show here, but there would be, essentially we would have all our different functions laid out, and then we would show the relationships and possible feedback loops between them. For an IDEF level 0, it's a way of showing the functions as well as its inputs, controls, mechanisms, and outputs. All right, so in a simple example, if we were talking about making coffee, our inputs would be the coffee grounds, maybe a filter, and some water. And then our outputs would be a pot of coffee and then some used coffee grounds and a used filter. All right, and this would be governed by some controls like the directions for the coffee machine, a recipe, maybe some environmental regulations. And then the mechanisms, how are we able to make the coffee? We'd probably have a person involved, some electricity, and a coffee machine, right? That feeds and that provides a mechanism to make coffee. So that would be how we could build out an IDEF level 0. All right, and then our final functional analysis technique is models and simulations. Oftentimes in systems engineering, there are problems that we can't simply write equations to and can't get a straight answer by just doing simple functional analysis. So we can build an abstraction in a systems simulation software or program that shows all the key attributes, features, and relationships between components. And then we can let that model run over time and see what outputs we can find. All right, so this is definitely a key slide here. So when we're talking about a functional hierarchy, what we have up top is what we call our fundamental objective. The fundamental objective is the reason that the system exists, the reason that the main thing we are trying to achieve, as we say here, the most basic high-level objective that our stakeholders care about. All right, so in our previous slide, it would be deliver the payload rapidly and accurately. All right, and then we have supporting functions that are all tied to that fundamental objective. The fundamental objective should take generally the verb object form, but it might have some additional descriptors as needed. All right, but then when we get into our functions that support the fundamental objective, there should just be strictly verb object. What's important about the functional hierarchy is, as you can see below, it provides a clear understanding of what functions the system will need to perform, and it allows us to build upon for more detailed functional analysis. We eventually can use it to help us when it comes time for candidate solutions, which we'll talk about in solution design, making sure that our candidate solutions can actually achieve these functions. And as you can see at the bottom, we want to maintain that verb object form, which I've been talking so much about. One way we can, especially when you're working in groups, perform and build out your functional hierarchy is by doing affinity diagramming. So this is an example from previous semester when we were looking at what a squad needs to accomplish. And essentially, each group member wrote different ideas on Post-it notes, different colors you can see, was one from each individual, and then they grouped them and saw some similarities and then came up with their overall functions. So their functions were move the squad, employ weapons, and maintain awareness. All right, that's what the 3 key functions that a squad would perform. So this idea of affinity diagramming, you can do it with Post-it notes. You guys are all very tech savvy. I'm sure you can get creative and use some kind of Google form or shared document online, and also do this kind of brainstorming, which we'll talk about later, to develop your functional hierarchies. All right, so now we're going to give an example of a functional decomposition. So this idea of a functional hierarchy, it's not just necessarily your fundamental objective and one level of functions. You should be able to go deeper than that potentially. All right, as we say at the bottom, functions should be decomposed past just their first function level. You should go multiple levels deep. And your subfunctions also need to have that verb object format for clarity and for continuity and for consistency. All right, so if I was talking about going out to dinner for a night out on the town, if you will, something I'm sure many of us have not done recently, but are looking forward to the day when we can all go out to dinner again. It might look something like this, right? So our fundamental objective would be to provide a pleasurable dining experience for a night out. That's what the restaurant needs to do for me as the customer. So the restaurant needs to provide that pleasurable night out experience. All right, and three things, and I'm sure we can think of more, but three key functions that a restaurant needs to do that support that fundamental objective. First, they need to attract customers. Second, they need to feed the customers. And third, they need to satisfy the customers. All right, but we can go deeper. So when we talk about attract the customers, what does that mean? Well, I came up with three different ways we can attract customers. We can create ads, we can put ads in newspapers, online, TV advertisements, what have you. We can offer promotions where, buy one, get one free, or, and there's all kinds of other promotions or happy hour deals, etc. that restaurants like to run. And finally, build their reputation. So you can attract customers by building your reputation and increasing your Yelp rating, etc. That might help attract customers. Now, when it comes to feeding customers, two sub-functions of feeding customers, you have to order the food. As a restaurant, we need to make sure we are stocked and we have food in the kitchen, food in the refrigerators and the deep freezers. So we need to have food ordered and on hand, and then we need to be able to cook the food, right? So we need to achieve those two, and we could probably come up with some other ones related to food, but those are two sub-functions of feeding the customers. And then our third function of satisfying the customers. We have to process reservations. So if it's a nice restaurant for a nice dining out, I probably need to have a reservation to that restaurant. So we have to have a way to process reservations, and whether it be, a hostess that answers the phone, or if there's an app and you're using OpenTable, for example, that's all different ways we can process reservations. And then we have to provide service. So we need to have someone that is bringing out the food and the drinks. We have to have a busboy that's cleaning the tables and bussing the tables, and everything in between, a manager that is managing the flow of the restaurant, etc. But we need to provide service. So this would be an example of a functional decomposition if we're looking at a restaurant and how they would provide a pleasurable dining out experience.